Hi, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my craft room. I'm excited to bring you some more holiday Christmas inspiration today. I'm going to be using Avery Elle products, specifically their Woodland Scene Builder set, as well as the Fall Picnic set. There's a couple images that I pulled from that stamp set, like that cute little owl. I'm going to be using my Zig watercolor brush pens for this card. So I did stamp and emboss my images. I used VersaFine and Pinecone, which is a brown ink. And because it's a pigment ink, it gives me a chance to emboss with some clear embossing powder before that pigment ink dries. So now I've created some thick lines to watercolor in, and I don't have to worry about my colors bleeding out into places I don't want it to go as much. So I'm starting off with kind of a holly green color. I've colored everything that's supposed to be green with this green. Some of the grass, the little branches of my trees, bushes, as well as any kind of plant, leafy plant that's coming up out of the ground. And then I used my clear blender brush, which is basically just filled with water, to blend and fill in the color. So I just laid down a little bit of color, kind of like I do with my alcohol markers in the darkest parts, and then use that clear water blender pen to blend that color out to fill out the rest of the image. So there's still some shadow without overly saturating my paper. And I'm repeating that for my reds, again using kind of like a holly or candy apple red color. It has a little bit more of a pink undertone than a blue undertone, so it is a kind of a bright pink, but I thought it looked really Christmassy, so that's why I picked that color. And then I'm going to go through and color in with browns. I did use kind of more of a brown gray, so when I blend out the color, as you can see, it kind of is a purpley gray. So then I'm going to bring in more of a tan color and cover that image again to kind of brown back out that the trees. So it's not so gray, but more of an orange undertone for that tree. The paper that I am coloring on is a mixed media paper, so it's a little thinner than watercolor paper, so I'm trying to not really oversaturate my paper. I then color in the lights with yellow, and my little mouse is gray, and then the same light brown that I use for the trees, I'm going to color in my owl and my deer. I'm going to completely color in anywhere where I want the brown to be darker, and then using that same technique as I've done for shadowing, I'm just outlining where I want the darkest part of my image to be and then blending it out with the blender. So that's why there are two different shades within my owl and my deer, but I did use the same color for both. I did use some kind of a peach color for the little girl riding on the deer, and then those yellows to create little blonde hair. I tend to do little blonde girls because that's what my daughter looks like in most of my coloring. But you can definitely switch up however you like for your coloring if you are going to replicate this card. Now there are dies for these two stamp sets, but I don't own them, so I did fussy cut everything out. It took me some time, but I usually have some type of TV show while I'm fussy cutting, so it goes by pretty quickly, but I did edit that out. And now I am just using my paper trimmer to trim anywhere where the stamp ends on the sides and the top and bottom of my woodland scene here. Now this scene is kind of a different size. It's not 4.25 by 5.5. It doesn't fit perfectly on an A2 size card, so I just grabbed a large piece of that mixed media paper again to do some distressing and just use a pencil to mark where I needed the ground to be in my background, and I'm using pine needles to create that green ground. And then I grabbed Stormy Sky because I wanted it to be more of an evening scene to fill in the sky portion of my background. And there you can see when I lay my woodland images down, you can see where it kind of separates between the ground and the sky on my card. So now I know where I need to trim my background. I am just going to grab a paper trimmer and just line things up approximately where I want them to go, and then just trim down my scene to fit perfectly behind my stamped image. So my background altogether measures just a tiny bit shy of 5 3/4 by 3 3/4. So it's an odd shape, but that's okay because I can create my own envelope, or maybe just put it on my own mantle because I think it's really cute. So we'll see how I deliver it, but it's still an envelope, like a normal envelope size, just has to be, probably just got to make my own. So after I trimmed my distressed background down, I did spray it with my distress sprayer to add some water droplets and activate that oxide ink. It did make some really large spots that I wasn't thrilled about, so I did go back with more ink to cover up some of those spots and darken that back up. And then using wet glue, I just glued that background scene to my distressed background, and I can move on to adding in my sentiment. So I used the Happy Holidays die set, also from Avery Elle, and I die cut it out of some gold mirror cardstock from Cardstock Warehouse, and then a layer of the same mixed media paper that I've been coloring on because I wanted my whites to make sure that they matched. I didn't want to use two different kinds of cardstock. So I did slightly off center those so that white looks kind of like a drop shadow behind the gold. Just glued them together using my wet glue and then glued that sentiment directly to my background. Now I'm going to add my little deer with the little girl on the right using some foam squares. I did use thinner foam squares for that from Scrapbook Adhesives. And then I popped up the little floral piece in front, my owl, and my little blue bird. And then the rest of the plant life, the fauna, I did glue on just with wet glue. So just play around with the layering. I think it turned out really nice, and I like the different dimension. Now, since my card is wonky and I honestly didn't measure it, I just used my eye to trim this down. I trimmed a card base that was wide enough to fit around my background, leaving a tiny white border. And then I used my scoring part of my cutter to create where I needed to put the crease in the card. I folded it over and then trimmed off the excess for the other side of the card. So I did this a really weird way. I don't normally eyeball my measurements. I tend to be pretty precise, but I just went for it for this card. Now that I have my card base, I can just use some wet glue and attach my background to my card base. And that will complete my card. I didn't really add anything else. I thought there was enough bling with that gold cardstock. And then just there was a lot of busyness going on in my scene that I felt like it didn't really need anything else. So I really like how it turned out. I did have a couple of extra pieces that I colored that I didn't put on the front because I ran out of room, so I just thought I would glue them on the inside. I usually don't stamp on the inside. I tend to forget, so it's nice to have a cute little couple images to bring my outside scene inside the card. I really like how it turned out. Like I said, it's kind of busy, but I think it really works, and I love how the Happy Holidays really pops because of that gold cardstock. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!